Mr. Perkins, you have the floor then for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to this Auditor General report. Maybe I could start with Mr. Kukucha. So, and then Mr. Met. But Mr. Kukucha, there were board members that had more conflicts of interest than others. And one of them was Andre Lismatot, who is named the most in the Auditor General's list of that. When I look down the list of companies that her company, Cycle Capital, is invested in, it looks hard to me to see that she could ever be in a board meeting, that she was recusing herself all the time. Did you see her leaving the room a lot?
Honourable member, I joined the board at a time, but I believe it was Ms. Mathot's last meeting. So I was not privy to any of the previous work or conflicts she declared.
Mr. Ouimet?
Yes, I participated in the council with Ms. Mathod. She was there before I was, and she left before the end of my mandate during a time when I observed her behaviors. Every time a conflict was declared, she recused herself from the virtual meeting room.
Encurum Alberta Inc., MindSense, Spark Microsystems, Concentric Agriculture, Polyservant, ViewReal, Cellfuel, Green Mantra Technology, Crystal Labs, Borealis Wind, Development Efficient, Equisphere, Global Spatial Technology Solutions, Fractional Systems, GHG Satellite Inc., Helen Inc., Horatio Inc., Metamaterial Technologies, Peak Power, Pure Solid Treatment Solutions, Terramera, Advanced Intelligence Systems, Anomera Inc., Cell Fuel Inc., I guess, and Chrysalis and Fractional Systems. Total $114 million, Mr. Emet, while she was on the board, that the financial interests of her venture capital firm had interest in all this. Awful lot of transactions that she left the room for. She probably wasn't in the room very much then, is that right? She was out of the room by the looks of all of these all the time. That's $114 million. Do you think it's appropriate that a board member had $114 million invested in companies she had a financial interest in during her time on the board?
Monsieur le Président, je n'ai jamais...
Mr. Chair, I wasn't closely following her interests. All I can say is that I observed her behavior, and my memory is that she declared a conflict of interest and recused. I won't weigh in further on that.
You weren't following her interests. Pretty hard not to when they brief you at the beginning of every meeting of the conflicts that each director has, and then go about voting for those projects that director has when she has them. And Mr. Kukucha, you referenced that she left the board when you did. Are you aware that she left the board and went to Canada's Infrastructure Bank as a board member?
Honourable member, I did not track Ms. Mathot's activities post-STTC in the one board meeting I sat in with her.
You're not aware of her testimony here that she got $170 million from the Infrastructure Bank board while Ms. Mathot went over there?
Honourable member, I was not.
The issue, just one last thing, Mr. Kukucha, you hadn't read the Act when you got on the board. When I joined the BDC board, I read the BDC Act. It's not a difficult thing. You should always do that when you join a board. Secondly, the contribution agreements, you don't seem to know what they were. They are not the agreements between SDTC and the company being invested.
Your question,
They
Mr.
are,
Perkins.
I said, directed limits on what you can spend on. Did you read the ISED directed contribution agreements before you participated with everyone else in voting money outside of those terms to companies?
Honourable member, there's two types of contribution agreements. The contribution agreements that are made between the companies and the organization when funding is granted, and those were the agreements I was referring to. And yes, I take your point. There is an agreement between the government and the broader organization with regard to funding flowing. That document was not made available to me as part of my onboarding package, so I did not have an opportunity to read that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Perkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kukucha, I want to go back to how I ended my last session because something you said sort of astounded me. So just for folks watching, anyone that's following, because this is a complicated issue, the Green Slush Fund and this. Parliament appropriates money to be spent and transferred to the foundation, as it's called, in the green technology space. Over the years, it's been about $22 billion, but the last batch was about $750 million. And the fence posts, the guideposts for the foundation board in spending that are called contribution agreements between the industry department and says you can spend Parliament's money on this and only this. And the Auditor General found that in many instances, the board had gone outside of that, particularly the COVID payments, but other instances. A total of about $58 million was spent in the 5 years she looked at that were outside of the contribution agreements. In other words, against the rules that Parliament approved the money for. So you mentioned, Mr. Kukucha, that when you, in the orientation package, when you became a director, they did not give you the contribution agreements to review, so you understood those guideposts. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, to the best of my recollection, they did not provide that, and I defer to Mr. Ouimet's testimony where this was legislation that had not been updated, and we essentially were working in a system where it was my understanding that was provided both verbal confirmation by the CEO and from the ADM present that we were working within the government's approval.
So the question then is, and you were both on the investment committee, so how do you make these decisions without knowing the parameters? I mean, you said that the ADM was there. So the Auditor General referred to the fact that the Assistant Deputy Minister, a senior bureaucrat in the industry department, sat in every board meeting, every single board meeting. And we're to believe that the minister didn't know what was going on when he had an official there. You're saying, and in the Auditor General's report, it says that the official, the board interpreted the official not objecting as agreement that what the board was doing was correct. Did you feel that way?
Honorable member, we on the investment committee, we were aware of the general parameters of why we would be making investments around. There were environmental targets, there was GHG reductions, there was circular economy. There's a whole lot of criteria that we judged projects by and that the expert reviewers reviewed by. So when projects came to the project review committee, we very much had a set of criteria which we reviewed them against and worked very hard to do so.
You don't know that those criteria, whether they were actually consistent with the ISED, the industry department's contribution agreement, since you never saw them.
As stated, I don't recall receiving a copy of that in my orientation material, but that was a very long time ago, and a lot has happened since then.
Well,
Mr.
Ouimet was appointed long before you. So, Mr. Ouimet, did you have access to the contribution agreements at any time from your orientation on the board?
Absolument.
Yes. I read the contribution agreements, and I was perfectly aware of them. And I saw how the investment plans evolved. Just to give you a quick example.
You saw them.
Yes, I was aware of them.
Still approved money outside the contribution agreement then, since you were aware of them.
Non, j'ai approuvé des investissements en conformité.
No, I approved investments in accordance with the government's investment guidelines and
Right of that.
sorry.
Time